In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects.
So today is a bit of a follow-up on some of the other topics that we've talked about, drilling down a little bit deeper. And actually, although the Hunter Biden laptop conversations spurred it, I think that you can go even further back than that, because a question that's often come up in conversations that you and I have had is uh, trusting sources. And so the of course there's many people that if it's coming from the mainstream media it should be trusted, and of course the opposite also holds, where many people feel if it's coming from mainstream media that's a reason that it shouldn't be trusted, and then there's those that fall somewhere in between. uh, and where this came from originally was that we were talking about the New York Post as the source for the original source for the for the Hunter Biden laptop story, and whether that was uh, whether it should be trusted because it came from the New York Post, or whether it was more the content that was more important. So, broadly speaking, what are your thoughts on all that?
My thoughts are, I guess it's interesting when to think about what a news source should or shouldn't do when they have a story. So, for example, if we use the Hunter Biden laptop as sort of an example, and I could give a few different, um, well, as an example, we could look at the way that different media sources handled it. So, as part of the Twitter files release, they talked with an investigative reporter that had looked into the laptop. And what he said was he looked at the laptop, he verified certain information about it, looking at some of the metadata inside, and felt pretty comfortable it was Hunter Biden's laptop. And he looked at some of
Can you clarify that a little bit more? I lost the track of that. So the Twitter files release?
the Twitter files release. They interviewed a reporter,
Who interviewed
and
the reporter?
uh, I think it was Matt Taibbi or Michael Schellenberger. I can't remember which
Okay.
one.
So the people that were involved in Twitter that were looking back on the past information about the Hunter Biden laptop. I'm with you now. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They aren't involved with Twitter. These are independent journalists or activists. I don't know what you call them. Taibbi has done some independent reporting over the years. Michael Schellenberger is a guy that he's done some TED Talks about nuclear energy. He started out as kind of a progressive activist, an environmentalist, had a change of heart in some ways, and now feels that nuclear power is a much. We're getting kind of off track, but I'm just kind of giving the background of who these guys are.
Okay.
And then he ran for governor of California, didn't win, and they asked him to be one of the reporters that was going to give the information about the Twitter files. Another one was Barry Weiss, a former New York Times reporter. Matt Taibbi, he's an independent reporter that's done some things over the years. And anyway, they when they were, I can't remember if it was the Twitter files that Schellenberger or Taibbi released, but they were talking with a reporter from Breitbart. But this guy talked about how he had looked at the laptop, and he didn't, do a full forensic analysis, but he looked at a lot of the metadata. He looked at some of the files. He, became somewhat comfortable that it was Hunter Biden's laptop. And then he compared many of the emails that were on the laptop to actual emails that had been received or had been verified as a part of other investigations and criminal trials and things like that. So he could verify a lot of the emails. And then he looked at a lot of the information on there and compared it to verifiable information from travel logs from the White House, those sorts of things. So he became somewhat comfortable that it was at least his laptop and a lot of the information was verifiable, even if the whole thing wasn't verifiable. And then that would be kind of one level of verification. Another level of verification was CBS News, that they brought in some outside experts, and those outside experts didn't do a full forensic analysis, but looking at metadata and other things, they were able to with a high level of certainty, verify that it was his laptop and that some of the emails seemed very they seemed to be verifiable, but not to the level of a forensic analysis. And then we had the Washington Post that did a full forensic analysis that apparently took like 9 months, where they looked at all of this information and they gave it to two outside experts. They did the most in-depth, at least that I'd seen, investigation of the laptop itself and of the emails. But even them, they said, well, even those emails that they could verify, a very good hacker, it's possible, could have faked some of these emails. But you look at the three different levels, just three kind of examples that I've given of verification or investigation of the laptop, and you'd say to yourself, well, which one would have been enough to report on a long time ago? Did you have to do a full forensic analysis before you could report on anything? Would at least some of those lesser verifications, would that be enough to kind of set you off another direction? And I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. I'm not saying the only way to do it is the Washington Post, or that the other ones are enough. But you can see that with different stories, there's going to be different lengths that different reporters and different news outlets go to verify the data. And I don't think there's one answer. You know what I mean? I don't think there's one, I think if you gave the Hunter Biden laptop to different people, they might go to different lengths to verify it before they started reporting on it. But that is interesting to think about, like what length should be gone to before you at least start giving some information to the public about the laptop.
Sure, and the way that people will report on the information. Again, if we stick with the laptop as an example, the way that they report on it should reflect the depth to which they have explored, investigated. If they haven't seen anything, they might report it as this other organization is putting forth this information and claiming that blah blah blah. If they've seen just a superficial summary of things, then or done their own superficial brief analysis, they might say, based on preliminary investigations, we can say blah blah blah. When they've had it for a long period of time, they can then say, based on the investigation, we can now definitively say, and then whatever it is they feel like they can say. And of course, all of that is important, and it is useful to look at how they all talk about it. But I think I was hoping with this conversation to take a step back and look at a larger the larger picture. Look at the forest, if you will, instead of the trees. And so let's say a new story comes out. It turns out that Biden was involved in a hit and run car accident. He may have been drunk, and so then this story is released by some particular outlet. How do we decide if the information is to be trusted?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's going to be on such a case by case basis. When you talked before about some people just don't trust the mainstream media, I can trust them, but I do take it with a grain of salt because, I think you and I have had some discussions about reporting over the last few months, and there are times when it does seem disingenuous how they don't look into certain aspects of the story. So yeah, as you said, there's an accident. So if you have, obviously, if the police are making statements about it, that's an easy one. You can report what's being said there. If there were eyewitnesses, you can say, we talked with so and so who was watching it, or we talked with bystanders, and they said that this happened. Those types of things. So depending on what is known, what the police are saying, what the authorities are saying, how many sources you have, it would be it would just be kind of on a case by case basis.
Mm-hmm. And so if we were to say, for example, that this came from Yahoo News, that this was who was reporting this story, would that have any sort of impact in your reading, in your belief that this is being reported, that all the information is being reported, that it's being reported accurately, that no one's jumping to any sort of conclusions?
Well, if it's just an accident, I don't think I'd have too many questions. You're like, oh, that's interesting. There was an accident. Mm-hmm. If there was some question of foul play or something, then I might have further questions, you know.
Okay, so let's take actually something that did happen a couple months ago. There was the individual that broke into Nancy Pelosi's house and then attacked her husband with a hammer. And there were some information came out, and then more information came out later on as it went on. Some accusations were made by certain people. Would the source of that initially all we have is an invasion, an attack with a device. Somebody was injured. It wasn't Nancy, and the police were involved. Like you say, that's sort of that's not too complicated. But then some people might wonder, well, why did this person decide? Was it somehow politically motivated, or was there something more nefarious, something more creepy going on? Did this attacker and the Nancy's husband actually know each other beforehand? Is this something that we should be there? Is there something there that's not being talked about? And so when you have these things, is something being said? Is something not being said? Is something being held back? Is a certain angle being pushed? At that point, then we look to the news source. And so if the news source is, let's say, right-leaning or left-leaning, was it the Daily Wire? Is that the one that Ben Shapiro started? Okay, yeah. So it comes from there. If it has certain other information, does that mean that you are more likely to believe it or be more suspicious of it?
Me personally?
Yeah, you.
I guess it depends on what they're talking about. For example, when that first came out, anybody, when I saw something written about it anywhere, I didn't have any questions. And then somebody started, and then came out some stories that, it was said that they didn't know each other and that he was attacked. And then somebody, I can't remember who, came out with, they started reporting on the fact that when the police had shown up, that the assailant had let them in the house. And at first they weren't attacking each other. They weren't doing anything. And so then you were wondering, well, what's going on? How is it that he kind of was in the house and it didn't seem like they were antagonistic towards each other? So when certain questions like that come up, then I do like to see those resolved. It's just as an example, we were talking about Twitter the other day, and there was some question about a rise in hate speech. Elon Musk presented a tweet where he kind of played the other side, and it didn't seem like the news sources were investigating that at all. So then I had some questions. At first, I thought, oh, that's strange. Why is hate speech higher? I wonder what's happening there. And then when there was another side of the story that I didn't feel like was being investigated, I was anxious for somebody to investigate it. So when questions come up, yeah, I do want to see those things investigated. Mm-hmm. I mean, when it first comes out, if there's nothing seems suspicious, then I feel fine with it. When there's certain questions being asked, I do want to see both sides, kind of those questions put to bed, I guess. Mm-hmm. And it seems like it'd be somewhat easy. When we had the Pelosi stuff, maybe they could have made a statement about what actually happened when they arrived, and maybe it's just
do that. Huh? That wasn't done.
I didn't see that. No, I mean it may have been done, but I didn't see it.
Yeah. Well, all of these questions got me thinking about whether, not only within our own biases, but also beyond it. How do we know if a source can be trusted? And oftentimes we blanket, we group certain things together. Like we were talking earlier about the mainstream media sort of be glommed together as one. And we talk about some of the extremist media sites doing the same thing. But even within a media site, if you take, for example, in some circles, a respected media source, the New York Times. The New York Times has a lot of different content. Some journalists have won awards. There's also people that like to editorialize, that are paid specifically to put forth opinions on different things that are not necessarily well researched. And then, of course, there are the letters that are come in there, and then guests that come in to write editorials as well. So there's a lot of different content, and yet we tend to clump it all together as one. And so when something comes through from the New York Times, some people say, oh, good, New York Times, don't really think about who wrote it or what their position might be. Other people, oh, great, here goes the New York Times, again, without considering who wrote it or what their position might be. And there's a lot of range in all of that, and with all different, in all of the major news outlets all have that same issue, in that there's editorials, there's opinion pieces, there's, and then of course the deep dives, and then the quick breaking news articles that are written. And so is there a way to quickly assess whether something is worthwhile or not? And I ran across, let me find it. There's the share. Oops. This news site, which I've become very, very happy, very excited about, because it does actually answer all those questions. This is called, it's The Factual, and they organize all the different news outlets based on their average fact grade that they give them, and then also over on the other graph they have the tone of the writing, how opinionated or neutral was the language in which it was written. And so you have all these dots all represent different news outlets, and the higher up on the graph vertically that something it shows up, the higher a rating the website has given it. Now, the way that they rank by the site quality. Does it have a history of producing well-sourced, informative articles? The author's expertise. Does the author have a record of doing the same thing? The diversity and quality of the sources. Are they quoting different experts?
The author's expertise, aren't we talking about websites? There'd be hundreds of authors on each website, right?
Exactly. And that's kind of what we're getting at, is they go through, they give a media outlet a score based on looking at hundreds and thousands of different articles. And so
what you're saying is, if they look at the author's expertise on a lot of different articles from a particular news source, and then say on average they're pretty factual, on average they're not as factual. Is that what you mean?
Yes. So when they talk about an author's expertise, they're looking back over that author's previous work, and then they take all the information and they apply it to the media outlet in general, and then of course the tone as well. And so with all that information in place, you can look and you can see where these different news outlets, and some of them aren't really news, some of them are more science-based or academic, but it has all these listings of the different sites, and you can go through and you can pick a particular news source and decide, is this media outlet, this website, does it tend to be neutral, or does it tend to lean one way or the other? And then this website will also look at a particular article and analyze the article and tell you if it meets the same criteria. And one of the things I really like about it is that it's an algorithm. It's not a bunch of people that are sort of deciding on their own what they feel something may or may not be. It's something that they've put in place that can be applied universally across all different sources.
How is that an algorithm if somebody's having to decide how factual the reporting is? I mean, you can say they built an algorithm based on their subjective, somewhat subjective at least, determination of the factual nature of the writing, right?
The factual grade, the factual is the name of the website. So when they talk about the factual grade, it is the website's grade. And so they don't actually determine whether something was including all of the facts or omitting any particular facts. They look at historically the site, the author. Are there references beyond the site where they've gone to experts to talk to them? And then, of course, the language that was used that might be opinionated or neutral. So it's not actually a factual grade in the sense that you and I would consider facts. That's the name of the website.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Kind of, but it's still somebody determining, well, I think this one is more accurate or better sourced or whatever. And this can be helpful, I think, to help us say, well, I like this website better based on the determination of this website here. But ultimately, still, we still have to go to an individual story, and because you said a minute ago we shouldn't generalize. And I think you're right. We could be looking, for example, we could go to the New York Times or Fox News and see an opinion piece. Well,
Hmm.
that one we might treat a little bit differently. Or we might go to more of a news reporting part of the site or a story by just a reporter. And then after looking at that reporter, even though they're on the New York Times, we may feel that that particular reporter is more biased than others. Well, that might affect the way we look at the story. Or sometimes we look at a story and it's a great reporter, but for some reason they're leaving out some key parts that I want to have answered. So I might say, well, it is off of a good site that is pretty well trusted, but I still want these questions answered. I don't want to just generalize and say, oh, that seems suspicious, but I'll just believe it because it's on this website that I happen to agree with. You know what I mean?
Well, of course. I mean, you can't, since it's on there and it's put a certain, it's given a certain grade, you can't say, well, therefore I'm going to shut off my critical reasoning and just assume everything is fine without worrying about it. You're right. There still needs to be some personal investigation, but I think it does take a lot of the effort out of it when you go and you look at whether a particular article is likely to be more truthful or more evasive, because oftentimes we know when you and I, or when anybody's having conversations, well, this particular article comes from Fox News. Well, we should just ignore it then because it doesn't, there's no value over there. Well, if you were to actually take a look through this website, they'll give you an analysis of the article, assuming that they've looked at it. They'll tell you what's the language of the article. Are there lots of outside references, resources where they've gone to talk to different people to get different opinions? Are they linking to different individuals and different stories? Does the author have a history of experience on the particular topic? And so you get a little more information than your gut feeling. And this is where it's more important than what we can usually bring, because you or I, we're busy people. We got a lot going on. We don't have time to go and do the research that this website has gone to do for us. And so when we have 7 minutes to go and decide if we're going to read the article and if we're going to trust what the article says, well, this becomes a way to help simplify that process a little bit. It doesn't answer all the questions, but it does improve the likelihood of getting good information.
Maybe, I guess the assumption you're making is that website does as good a job as I would want them to do I don't know, I classifying different websites and sources as valid or less highly rated, and the same thing with news stories. But I don't know.
So
I'd
you
have to
believe
look
that
into
you
it.
can probably do a better job than what they've been doing.
Maybe. I don't know. I haven't looked at it. Do you think you can do a better job than five? Like you're saying, well, I'm trying to understand your point. Like you're saying because they're experts, I couldn't do better than them.
No. Well, I'm saying that not only have they put forth the time, there's more than one person, and they have more than 7 minutes to go and decide if an article is valid and contains useful or is more likely to be trusted than something else, rather than saying I heard this thing on Twitter and so therefore I already align with it. It already makes sense to me. I've heard this person make other comments that makes sense to me, so therefore I'm going to trust what I read on Twitter.
So let me get this straight. What you're saying is if there's a news organization or a website that has more time and more resources to research this stuff, I should believe it.
I think that if you have the choice between one that's well researched and something else that just hits you in the gut that makes you feel good, then yeah, I'd say that the other one is more likely to be accurate.
Okay, well then why don't you go to Fox News and just trust them all the time? They have resources. They look into this stuff more time than you do. You don't just believe them.
No,
Just
because
saying that somebody has the resources and the time to look into it doesn't mean I'm going to believe them. I told you I don't know this website very well. I have to go through it and see what sort of grades they're giving people. I look at some. I'd be happy to, I can probably do that. But your argument that, well, they have experts, they have more people and more time, so you should just believe them more than yourself because listen, you only have a few minutes. You're going to believe yourself more than them. Well, you feel the same way about a lot of news sources, don't you?
I mean, you bring up a good point. Just because it's there, just because someone's done the work, doesn't mean they're actually, necessarily going to be trusted. I did look up a couple of them. For example, the Brookings Institution are given a grade of 76%. Business Insider's given a grade of 71%. PolitiFact 71. New Republic 71. New York Times 70, Washington Post 68.7. And of course, again, like we were saying earlier, when you look at a score or an overall impression of a website, you have to take in consideration the totality of the site. The editorials, the opinion pieces, the investigations, and everything else.
Do
And
you really?
so, what?
Do you really? Like, it seems like, it's
It could.
interesting. The only thing I'm asking you is opinion pieces, for example. Let's say somebody made an opinion piece. That's an opinion piece. I mean, Tom Cotton wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times. Are they gonna, if people thought that wasn't well sourced, or I mean, you look at the New York Times opinion piece writers like Thomas Friedman or Paul Krugman, others like that. I don't think those are those are opinion pieces that are kind of trying to take a broad, eagle-eye view of what's happening in the world and give their opinions on it. So
Sure.
we probably should differentiate between opinion pieces and what the newspaper is saying. So I don't know that they would look at opinion pieces in that same way.
Well, but when they give a website or a media source an overall score, they're including that if those opinion pieces are part of the reference. And I think this is, we all do the same thing. If we use another example with Fox News, a lot of people, when they think of Fox News, they think of Sean Hannity and they think of Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham. Those are the most vocal voices. Janine Pirro, I think her name is. But of course, there's more than just these people that have an hour in which they can put forth their opinion. They have newscasters, and so the entire Fox environment is, if you were to ask people's opinion about the entire environment, most will not specify, well, I like this side, I don't like that side, I like the people that do this part, I don't like the people that do the other part. They usually will have an overall opinion of the source. And so yes, maybe we should be distinguishing between the different aspects of these media outlets, but most people don't. And so when we talk about the New York Times, as you were earlier, there's a difference between someone who's writing about their opinion and someone who is talking to experts and digging deep into some different opinions and then exploring and doing an analysis and bringing forth all these other people to put together a well-researched, fact-based story.
And another thing, Brian, if you bring up that chart again on factual, I did notice it's not too surprising to me, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but it's not too surprising to me that it seems like the higher ratings are at the top. It seems like there's a lot more blue at the top. Now, maybe that's just because all the left-leaning media sources are better sourced, have higher scores. I don't know, but
well,
I'm not surprised. I'm not too surprised that you found this website agreeable or that you liked it, given that all that blue is there at the top.
The blue.
I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying, you've looked at it and you tended to agree with it, but it's kind of, it's either confirmation bias or you're right, I guess.
Now, if you look at the blue, let me get the blue to highlight. If you hold on one of the dots, it'll then highlight all of that particular color. And so there's the blue. Mm-hmm. Now, if we get the purple, which is the more neutral, those tend to be higher than the blue, and they also lean more towards the right end of the spectrum, so they're more of a neutral tone. And then if we go to the red, what's the orange? Orange is moderate. Where's the orange first? Orange, there we go. So one of the things you'll notice is that if we look at the moderate right, and then if we go to there's not a whole lot of them. And then if you go to the moderate left, there's a lot more sources. And then if you go to the hard right, those tend to be, closer to the bottom. And then
it's a little bit surprising, maybe you could help me understand this. When you went to the hard right, that the tone was further to the left. I would have thought the hard right would have a tone, as I understood it from what you showed me before, and I could be remembering wrong, had to do with kind of if it was really leaning right or really leaning left. And so this one is a little bit moderate, more the hard right is a little more moderate in its tone. Am I
No.
understanding?
The tone is if the dot is further to the right, then it's more of a neutral tone. If it's further to the left, it's more of a biased tone.
Oh, left is by. Okay, so yeah, the all the right stuff seems to be more to the bottom and left, and the
Right.
stuff on the left
Now
seems
there
to be
is
upper
this
and
one.
right.
What is this? Conservative Institute.
Hmm.
They've got a pretty high ranking in terms of the grade.
Kind of, but not as high as a lot of those blue ones.
The blue. mm, there's a couple that are higher. Yeah.
I mean, this, so I guess what I'm saying is it's not too surprising that you agree with this website. I'm not saying this proves anything, but it does kind of align with your, what I would say would be your expectation that the right-leaning stuff, it has a lower score and the tone isn't as good as the left-leaning stuff. So you could be right. I mean, maybe that's just,
Well, they
um,
also make a distinction between the moderate right and the far right, and moderate
sure,
left and far left. And
sure.
and I have found that the further right you go on the political spectrum, the more likely they are to use language like patriotism and adject or verbs like fighting and fight for justice, and they use more aggressive languaging. And so because of that, I'm not at all surprised. In fact, I ran across some research papers that seem to reinforce that. But if you based on that, the fact that they are do have a more biased tone is not too surprising.
No, no,
Um,
I agree. The further right you go, the probably the further to the left of the I would expect the more moderate of both the left and the right to be higher into the right than the far left and the far right.
mhm.
All I'm saying is you look at this, and the further up and the further to the right you get, the more blue you see, both dark blue and light blue.
I'm also noticing that you're seeing a lot more blue in general. If you look at that, the moderate right there, there's not a lot of dots. There was what I would say, quick count, 20 or so, maybe 25. If you look at the hard right, where there we go, maybe about the same, maybe 20. And then if you look at the moderate left, probably closer to 35 or
Yeah,
so.
35, 40. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe 50.
And then the far left, 25. So I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
part of the reason that you're
this is what
seeing
you and I
that's
have talked about before is yeah, there's more left-leaning news sources than right-leaning. And that's one of the reasons why Fox News seems so popular is people on the
Mhm.
right have fewer choices.
Yeah. And that could also be an indicator as to why it appears that there's a higher density of left leaning in certain areas because there's just more left sources in general.
No, I don't think so, Brian. I think when you just look at the blue, the light blue or the dark blue, they're further to the right and further up than yeah, so right now we're looking at the moderate left
Yep.
and take away how many, I mean, not even considering how many there are. I think if you look at the light red, you'll see that they're not as high and to the right.
Yeah, I think you're that's probably true. More spread out. Although the concentration is right around the same. If you look where my dot is between the 65 and the 80 along the bottom graph, that's the highest concentration of the moderate right. And then you'll see the same basic concentration. In fact, it starts to skew below 65 down to like 60. Again, down up to about 80. So the concentration is fairly similar. Now, do they go higher? Let's see. I'd
Yeah,
say
they do.
between 80 at the top. If you look at this little cluster here, down to about 55 or so. And then if we look at the moderate right, it doesn't go as high, but it doesn't go as low either. It does go closer to the bottom, so it does have like maybe a higher threshold on the moderate left for the average grade. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that would be interesting to look at if they had some way to say what the average score was or something like that. But it does, I mean, I'm just eyeballing it, but it does look like, I mean, look at it right now. And
Sure.
part of it's the concentration, but it looks like there's a lot. I mean, that low, look at like the last, the on the, at point one, 0.3, 0.35, 0.4. The lowest stuff there is red.
There's one thing I forgot to mention, and this is sort of important for the discussion that we're having, which is that their ratings of the political ideology of these websites, they got from someplace else. I think it was that place that we'd have looked at 6 months ago or so on the on some of the political leanings of these websites. This website, thefactual.com, doesn't give the media sources a political rating. They use that. And so, and I'm not trying to give them a pass, but that isn't something that they're incorporating into the process. They're just using that to help for this graph to give it a little more visual usefulness, I guess you could say, breaking it up into groups.
And I'm not trying to say this discounts the usefulness of the graph or the website. I think it's useful, but there's going to be some level of subjectivity in all of this.
Sure.
And so I think this can be a useful tool. We can look at it, gain some information about the sources that we're using, and maybe even times look at their analyses of the story or something like that. But we're still going to have to make our own decisions, and we're still going to have to say, okay, does this story pass the smell test? I'm going to look at a few different pieces of reporting on this and try to determine as best I can whether it makes sense to me. And it's not a perfect process, but I can't just give it over to the experts because the experts tend to disagree with each other so much.
They
So
do.
I don't know which experts to give it over to completely.
We only have a moment or two left, and so I'm just going to kind of summarize my perspective here and why I wanted to go this route. And when we look at things like, we try and be our own best advocate, and we try and get the best information. We are the ones, not just you and I, but everybody. We are the ones that can get crippled by things like confirmation biases, cognitive biases. Everyone says, "Oh, you need to apply critical thinking." Well, if that were so easy, we wouldn't be having these debates because we always get stuck up in our biases. And the better we can be about taking the people out of the process and applying formulas, the more likely we're going to be the easier it's going to be to avoid those biases and those the shortfalls, the pitfalls of some of the critical thinking that we're not able to apply.
Sure.
In the last few minutes, anything you want to throw in?
No, I guess I think that's good. I think we covered everything pretty well.
Okay. All right. Well, given some of the phone conversations you and I had the last couple of times, I'm this one a little better than I was anticipating. So I'm glad it went the way it did. We'll probably take a little break for the holidays, and then we'll have a conversation about what we'll cover in the next one.
Okay.
All right. Later, Colin.
Yeah.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.